Hey folks, it's Bear Gardner, and I'm here with more coverage for the United Front expansion run-in. So, United Front is on its way. We have the mini expansion coming, and with that we will have obviously new cards, which I'll cover in another video. We're also balance patch, which will be covered in another video, and then this video is going to cover the rotations. So, as ever, I'm a Kards Content Creator, a member of the Kards Contributor Program. I am also part of internal testing, which does restrict some of what I can say, but has no impact on my opinions. 1939 have been very kind to allow me to continue doing things in lots of different directions, which is great. You can find all of my stuff in the links down below. Please like, follow, subscribe. Come catch me on Twitch when I'm streaming. If you're able to, please support the channel. It does make all the difference in the world. I am a disabled content creator, and I aim to be one of, if not the primary voice for new players and onboarding and improving your new player experience as part of Cards in general, because I think it's a great game and well worth playing. So, what is rotation? I always cover this in case you're new to the game. So, whenever we have a change in the game, there is usually a rotation in which a number of cards are taken out of the game, and then cards come back in. So, in the cards rotating out aren't permanently gone. So, no card is ever permanently gone from your collection. 1939 don't just delete the cards, they just go and sit on the bench for a while, in sporting terms, and sometimes come back with a new lick of paint or a change to card text. In this instance, we've got 20 cards for this rotation that are leaving. So they will be going to the reserve pool, and then they'll either come back in their own form or sometime changed in the future if and when they come back. I'm going to go through them and talk about each of the cards, explain what I think about the rotation, and whether or not I think it's going to have a major impact on the meta. Right, let's jump in. Right, the first card on the chopping block is the Blohm and Voss BV 138. This is a German 3-cost, 2-op cost, 2/4 fighter, and it's an elite card. And it says, draw a card when the enemy triggers your countermeasure. I will be reading these out for audio, so you can always skip that, because I know some of you can see it on screen, but I know a lot of the people who follow my content do actually listen to it as an audio format in like a podcast, so I try and throw the text out there as quickly as I can. This card is not a big miss. No one was really playing this card because it was, even in a countermeasures deck, it was frankly situational and just going to get blown up, and countermeasure decks weren't that good in the first place, because countermeasures has this issue where for a while you have a lot of fun when you're playing against players who don't know how to recognise a countermeasure, and then as soon as you go against a player who does know how to recognise a countermeasure, they play around them, and then units like this just waste your credits. I don't think anyone's going to lament the removal of this card, and I kind of sort of hope that it comes back in a more interesting form. That's kind of all I've got to say on it. I don't read this as a particularly big change or having any real meta impact. So, let's move on. This is the Mosquito FB Mk VI. This is a 6-cost, 2-op cost British 4/4 fighter that has deployment, deal 3 damage to an enemy unit. And it did see some play, because it's a decent body that does some damage when you drop it, but it wasn't seeing world-breaking amounts of play. I don't think, again, I'm not sure this is a massively impactful change. There are decks that will miss this, because it was a nice option to have if you had a slot in your deck and you wanted a way to deal with enemy units with some damage, because obviously deployment damage is good, but the stats weren't amazing, they were just good. And this wasn't an overwhelmingly positive elite, but it was one that did see some play, so there will be some people who lament this, and maybe we'll see it come back, like repolished, and maybe with a bit of a buff in future, which would be kind of cool. I have played this card a few times. Admittedly, I've never necessarily kept it in a deck. It's often ended up being cut because I just didn't find I was getting enough value out of it. Because the Kitty Hawk is the just cheaper elite that does fine and is limited to a ground unit, but frankly that's what I'm using it for most of the time anyway, and it can target HQ and this can't. So anyway, it's rotating out, probably not world breaking, but there will be some decks that will miss it. This is a much more interesting rotation. This is the 507th PIR, or Parachute Infantry Regiment. 2-1 US Infantry, 2-3 stats with smokescreen, and at the end of your turn give a random friendly infantry unit +2 attack. It's an elite, and it used to see a lot of play in US frontline, and it was kind of okay. And I'm going to be... It might be controversial for me to say this, because there are some people who are saying this is maybe the last nail in the coffin of US. From the point of view of US frontline, anyway. I don't know that it really is. It's not that big of a hit. Like, it's fine. It's a good body that you can include, but often you'd end up cutting it because there were other things you could throw in. Because it had a reputation for buffing itself, which wasn't always what you wanted it to do. It can be a bit random. It was good, but not world break. I don't think this was as strong as a lot of people thought it was. It was just a decent, sensible include in the deck. So I don't think it actually massively changes anything, but I am aware that there are some people who will lament its passing. Here's a card that I don't lament the passing of at all. This is the 272nd Guards. It is a Soviet 8-cost, 2-op cost 6/6 Guard Infantry. It's an elite card. It's the last of it's the Soviet elite rather that's going in this patch, and it had destruction. Add a Joseph Stalin 2 to your support line. Joseph Stalin 2, right there, visible on the left-hand side of the screen, is the 8/8 Heavy Armor 2 tank that, if sent to hand, adds a copy to your support line. And there were a number of incredibly irritating ways to use this card to print multiple IS-2s, which were incredibly difficult things to deal with, and it was an incredibly tedious deck to play against, and was responsible for making a lot of new players very miserable because it felt basically unbeatable. Its only limit was that it was slow. I do not lament the removal of this because I don't actually particularly like the design of the card. I hope it goes away and they find a way to bring it back to do something interesting but less kind of egregiously snowbally. Or a way to make it immune to ways to, you know, repair it or duplicate it or add a copy. There's ways to add a copy of your last destroyed unit to your hand, which means you get this again, and then you put it down, and then you get another IS-2, and then you find another way to recycle it. You can see where it's going. The IS-2 printer was a real thing. I do not lament the removal of this card, but it will have an impact on some people because there are people out there who really like the IS-2 printer, and this single-handedly says no to that deck. The Japanese elite leaving us is very impactful. This is Audacity, and this is an incredibly good card. Audacity is a 3-cost Japanese order that says adds an Aichi D3A2 to your support line, deal 3 damage to a random enemy unit equal to its attack. So this drops the bomber on the board and then deals damage. This card saw play in most Japan decks, to be brutally honest, because it was just great value, because in addition to popping damage, it gives you a good body. Genuinely, this will be a hit. It will be a missed elite. I'm not necessarily sad to see it go, because I think it's time it maybe just sat quietly in the corner. So maybe it was just too much of an auto-include, and it's nice to see a bit of change. But this will be impactful. People will miss this card. And it's certainly interesting, given that we've had some conversations about aggro decks getting slower and slower and weaker, and this was a really strong aggro tool, which is now out of the game. So eyes open to see what comes back or changes to strengthen said decks. But yeah, Audacity is a card I've played a lot of. I will quite miss this card, but I'm sure it'll be back. Into the special cards, and we have the Fieseler FI 156. This is a 3-cost, 1-op cost, 1/3 German fighter, and it says at the end of your turn activate a random countermeasure in hand. This is another countermeasure enabling card that is gone and frankly no one's going to care about. Countermeasures decks might notice it, but countermeasures decks weren't really that good anyway, and when they were good, they were just annoying new players, so I'm not actually regretting seeing it go. Not a lot else to say about this. Is just showing that we're leaning away from over-automating countermeasures decks, and I can't say I object to that. British special leaving us this time round is the RAFF Lightning F4, the RAAF Lightning F4, which is a 5-cost, 2-cost, 3/4 fighter, and it says deployment, target enemy unit retreats. This card is very good played well, and will be a hit to some air decks that quite liked using it for removing guards, or bouncing threats back to hand. So yeah, this is actually quite a hit. I have played this card a lot. I will miss this card. Again, it's probably smart to just give it a rest, but it is just a good card that is being punted away for a while. But we are seeing some air buffs, so I think maybe it's nice to see some tamping down in other directions too, because this particular mini expansion is looking to make air stronger, especially Brit Air stronger again, ally-wise. Keep your eyes open on my channel for all the reasons why. Right, United we stand. Oh, I'm so glad this card's going away, because I just don't like it. I mean, that's kind of it. I'll try and be a little bit more specific about my thing with it, but I really just don't like this special. It's US special, 1-cost order, says deal 2 damage to a unit. If this destroyed it, both players gain 1 extra credit slot. It's just a really finicky kind of card that either you played it really well and you were in a position whereby you could make this advantageous, or it kind of just neutralized itself out for popping some damage on an enemy unit. I do not lament its removal, and I kind of hope it comes back with a rework to the text to make it more interesting, because this is just clunky. It's difficult to play well, because you are giving your opponent a credit slot, which, even though you're getting a credit slot yourself, can be incredibly counterproductive depending on what you're playing into, in return for some damage. Like, yeah, this is kind of indifferent removal that got overplayed a lot. I'm not sad to see it go. The Soviets are losing Spearhead as their special. This is a 2-cost order that says destroy a friendly unit and adjacent units. Your units get +X/+X, where X is the units destroyed. Or 3, if you're playing this well. So this is pay 2 to destroy 3 of your units and get +3/+3. But why on earth would you ever do that? And the answer, of course, is you would find units that had good destruction value so that you could do this and get some value out of it, and it would have spiraling value because you would get something else out of all of the units that were destroyed in some way, and there's a whole thing, and there are plenty of people who tried to build Spearhead decks. And honestly, even though I've never particularly played this card or found it, like, to be that good, I'm a little bit sad to see this go, because this is actually just an interesting card. It's not good. Sorry, Spearhead lovers, it isn't. But it's interesting, and it enabled people to try and build some kind of crazy decks that tried to do some really interesting combo stuff, and I'm always happy to see that in a game, as long as that combo doesn't end up being utterly insane and breaking the game. Why not? It's fun. So yeah, I'm kind of sad actually to see this go. I think there are other Soviet specials that could have been looked at instead of this, in my opinion, to rotate out. We'll have to wait and see, but yeah, I'm kind of a little bit sad to see this go. Because I like stuff like this that could enable the thinky people who like to play around with different kind of crazy off-meta decks. I think it's nice to have cards in there that they can do really weird things with, and this definitely fit that category. So I feel you, Spearhead lovers. I do. Right, Japan's special hitting its way into the rotation is the Matsue Regiment, a 3-cost, 1-op cost, 1/5 guard infantry, with deployment. Choose and discard a card, gain attack equal to the cost. I mean, this was a card you liked, because it was really good for combining with kind of any kind of discard effect, because if you could discard a card that gains you something, Sally, for example, and then gain attack equal to its cost and get the draw off Sally, this was actually a pretty good card to play. I'm not quite sure why this is rotating. I don't think it's particularly egregious or problematic, and if self-discard is still something that's going to be played around with in Japan, and we'll keep our eyes on the rest of the rotations to see if this is a direction that's going in, this kind of would have been fine to stick around. Again, I'm kind of like the Soviet thing. This is one thing that people played around and did some interesting off-meta stuff with, and nothing that really was breaking the game. So I'm not quite sure why it's rotating, but it is. Also, sad to see good art go. But yeah, we'll see. It'll probably come back, but not quite sure why. Right, case yellow. So we have arrived at limited cards that are leaving, and we start as we have before with Germany. The German limited card that's leaving us is case yellow, the 5-cost order that says deal 1 damage, your units get +1/+0, the enemy discards a card. It's a discard tool, and it's leaving. Sure. Although with discard being more of a thing, I'm not quite sure why this wasn't reworked or tweaked rather than removed, if you really wanted discard to be a thing. I mean, as it is, I don't think this card is particularly good or worth playing. I mean, it's decent, but at 5 cost, it's kind of right in there with Wolfpack, and you know, between the 5 of them, you've got 5-cost discard cards that have some effect. I mean, you could pop HQ for a damage with it, or pop a unit. Obviously, it buffs your units and the enemy discards a card. But I mean, if discard was going to stick around, I'm kind of surprised case yellow didn't. But ultimately, I personally don't lament its passing. I've never made a massive amount of use of it, although I know some people have. Maybe it'll see a rework and come back, don't know. But yeah, it's just leaving us. Just surprised me a little bit with discard being something that was being focused on. I kind of more expected this to find its way onto the balance patch than the rotation list. To Britain's Limited and the M3A3 Honey. My baby is leaving. I'm going to miss this card. Lots of people are probably going to miss this card. Lots of other people are probably not going to lament the removal of this card. For those who don't know, although I think many will if you've played the game for any length of time, the M3A3 Honey is the 2-cost, 1-op cost, 2/3 tank, and it says when you draw a card, your HQ gains +1 defense. This was an integral part of the Brit defense gain methodology. Play orders, gain defense, particularly anything that got you draw, or combine it with the Churchill. There are various British cards you could combine this with. I mean, Convoy is the obvious one. Draw some cards, gain some defense. This card saw lots of play in lots and lots of Britain slow roll decks. It kind of lost its bite because the big Britain slow roll deck obviously disappeared with the removal of Commonwealth from the game. So Honey's going to go and take a holiday for a while. I kind of get why. I personally like the card. I played the card quite a lot as just a good value card to have in Brit decks. So yeah, a little bit sad to see it go, but I do kind of get why. It's not really doing much proactively at the moment, so maybe time for a holiday. Right, this is the 332nd Engineer Regiment. She's the US Limited that's leaving us. 3-cost, 1-op cost, 1/2 infantry with deployment. Gain 1 extra credit slot, your HQ gains +2 defense. I am so glad to see this go away. I don't like this card. I think there are other cards that could have been hit, but at least this does hit ramp, and ramp needs hitting. I'm not going to hide the fact that I don't think so far, in much of what we've seen in this expansion, ramp has taken nearly enough of a hit. But at least this is something. This card was really good value. The milk truck. Just so insane. This is such good value for its cost. 2 HQ defense and a credit slot, plus you get a unit. Not a very good unit, but you get a unit. I do not lament this card's passing. I'm just a little bit sad that it's the only significant ramp nerf we've seen. But anyway, I am kind of glad to see it go. Right, Soviet Limited card that's leaving us is Machines of War. I mean, I'll do the formalities. It's a 5-cost order, and it says add the top Soviet infantry unit in your deck to your support line. No one played this card. No one is going to miss this card. We can move on. To Japan and the Key 44 Tojo. 4 cost, 2 op cost, 4/2 ambush fighter. Deployment, the enemy discards a random bomber from hand. It's seen limited play, but really it's not going to massively impact anything because Lord knows this is the definition of a situational deployment effect. However, I mean, going into ramp, if you were like expecting to play against ramp that was popping the big bombers into hand and wasn't able to get them out on the same turn, although it's ramp, they probably already have dropped them out and hit you in the face with them. But if they're holding like a B-24J, this is pretty good for discarding it. But really, I don't think anyone was playing this massively. It's an interesting card and a good tech card. I think this probably saw more, and I would probably bet decent reputation. I never bet money, it's not healthy. Unless I'm playing poker. But this is, I would bet, sees more and has seen much more tournament play than it is ever going to see in like open constructed, because on ladder you don't know whether this is going to have any effect or not, and even though it's a decent ambush card, it's very expensive and has a high op cost. So I don't think it's the end of the world. Again, it does fall into that category of kind of cards that I'm not quite sure why they're rotating it, but it's gone. Reichsbank is being rotated. The German 3-cost order that was nerfed. This is the first standard card going. And this 3-cost order said next turn you gain an additional 5 credits and cannot give orders. It's already been nerfed to the cannot give orders part because it was already seeing far too much play, and now it's being rotated. Yep, that's it. Bye. Right, the British standard card leaving us is Timely Supplies. This is a 2-cost order that says draw a card, it costs 2 less this turn. I'm kind of sad to see this go, because this fits into my usual category of just interesting to play around with. It's not as good as Convoy because it's only drawing 1 card. However, situationally, it can be really fun in like a Commandos deck because it isn't giving you a cost reduction. Honestly, there are other things you could have rotated. This could still have seen some play. Don't know why it's going, but it is, and it's not going to end the world because I don't think it was doing anything massively egregious. Is kind of a little low-key nerf to Commandos decks, though, because there are a few Commandos decks that would have considered running this just for the fact that it's an order that triggers your Commandos and then gives you a good chance of drawing a cheap order that you then play for free. So maybe that's the thing. Maybe they're worried that Commandos will take back off again. Not quite sure how they would do. They're never going to get insane without the card that we just saw disappear. Bye-bye, Reichsbank. But yeah, I'm a little sad to see Timely Supplies go, just because it fits into the category of interesting to build with. The US is losing Supply Chain as its standard card. This is the 2-cost order that says draw a card. If Supply Chain is discarded, add 2 copies of it to your hand with a cost of 1. Yes, it's that much of a mouthful. Yes, you kind of have to wrap your head around it. And yes, actually, in the right combinations, this could be used in really interesting ways as a draw mechanic. However, those were very situational and limited, and therefore I'm not necessarily shocked that this is being rotated, but again, I'm still on there are probably other things that you could have rotated that weren't in the just interesting to play around with, because this is a super thinky card. You really do need to build around this for it to do anything useful, because for this card to be worth the effort, you have to be able to discard it, because you don't really want to play it at 2 cost to draw a card, because that's not great. It's okay, but 1 cost to draw a card, so much better, especially when you get 2 copies of it when you discard it and can cycle it. But obviously there are ways that you can really do crazy things with that, so maybe that's part of the point. Who knows? But yeah, it's gone. I'm not overly moved by it, but there will be people who will miss this, because again, this is a card people cooked with. The Soviet standard card leaving us is likely to leave us to cheers of joy and rapture, and I kind of share them. This is Stand Together, and it's gone. As is a 1-cost order, and it says destroy friendly infantry at a Soviet tank with the same cost, give it blitz. The sole reason that this card was worth playing was getting out good Soviet 6-cost infantry, of which there are two very particular choices, one of which can be reduced to being free, the other of which, when it is destroyed, spawns two small versions of itself. And in both cases, you would get a KV-2, which is an incredibly strong tank. This card is the strongest single finisher for Soviet self-damage in the early ranks in the game, and is incredibly frustrating to play against, because especially if you have a limited collection, if someone is able to spawn a good value KV-2, you've basically lost the game. They're very hard to deal with. No one, I don't think, really truly I don't think anyone is going to lament the loss of Stand Together, because it was getting silly. When it only had one good target, it was okay. Now that it got more targets, it just self-damage was getting really crazy value out of this, and self-damage was good enough that it didn't need the value, because one of the reasons self-damage needed the value in the past was that it had to find a way to heal itself, and also it needed some extra value because it struggled for draw with the arrival of the 12th Mechanized Guards and all of the other stuff that Soviets have had recently. Self-damage got strong enough on its own that it doesn't need Stand Together anymore. So honestly, I don't think anyone's going to miss this. I think everyone's going to be quite happy to see it rotate, because it will probably taper self-damage to being a really good deck without having to deal with the insanity of this card. Anyway, that's pretty much me on Stand Together. Don't lament its passing. Doubt we'll ever see it come back in the same form. Could be proven wrong. Last but not least, we have Japan's standard card that's leaving us, and this is the 34th Infantry Regiment. It's a 1-cost, 0-op cost 2/2 infantry that says at the end of your turn, draw and discard the top card of your deck. This was a self-discard enabler, and okay, so you may have noted that back when we were talking about previous Japan cards rotating, I did wonder whether we'd see any more of the self-discard stuff rotating, and we have. The 34th is gone. I wonder if this is the thing. Between this, Supply Chain, which was occasionally used obviously in self-discard, because Supply Chain, if you had a US ally in self-discard, could proc itself to get some good value draw. Matsue Regiment, as I say, we talked about earlier, so this does look like there is a tapering away from self-discard as an archetype. I personally am not sad to see that be the case, but I know there are some self-discard lovers out there, and if you are one of them and they're taking away a deck that you found interesting, I kind of do feel it, because I don't think it was an egregiously strong deck. I personally hated piloting it, but I don't like playing any deck that feels like it's playing its own game and I'm just holding on to it. It's like riding a badly disciplined horse. I don't feel properly in control, but some people enjoyed this archetype, so this might be a hit to them. It's interesting to me that we've gone in this direction, but we have, and the 34th is leaving us. So we'll drop it a little bit of a wave as it goes on. And also, that leads us to drop a wave to the list of cards that are going, and for me to hop to summarise. Okay, so that's it. That is the rotation list, and my opinions on it. It's alright. Nothing massive in it, honestly. I haven't looked at it and gone, wow, this is huge, or that's huge. It's just a rotation list that feels more than anything else like a cleaning up exercise, and in the case of some of the self-discard stuff, maybe some pre-prepping for stuff that might be coming in future. I don't know. Maybe we're going to see some retakes on that. But it feels like a housekeeping exercise, and personally I actually like it when that's the case, because it's generally a sign that there's nothing too egregious out there. Obviously Reichsbank rotating, if it had been in its original state, would have been a fix, but since it had already been nerfed, it's now just getting rid of it because it was unplayable, which it was, by the way. They changed to Reichsbank, basically might as well have been blank the text, make it cost 9 credits, and wait until we can rotate it, but that's just me. But yeah, I mean, it's a pretty decent rotation list, nothing world-breaking, so those are the cards that have gone. Kind of interesting. If you've got your short thoughts, please share them. You can join my Discord, you can reach out down below. As ever, I hope it was useful. Please support and follow the channel if you can. Stay well, be good humans, and I'll catch you next time.